It's actually somewhat ironic. Literally yesterday I made a video on my experience with Smite over time and also what I expect from the future, and today we get news about exactly that. More specifically, we get news about Season 5 changes regarding esports. Now, I'm aware that some of you may not be interested in esports at all, you may not care about that side of the game, but this may be interesting for you anyways, as it kinda shows us an overarching tendency of where Smite is going to go and how high-risk currently sees it. And that, I think, is very interesting regardless of how you're playing the game. And also there's some impact that comes from the esports scene for the casual scene as always, which shouldn't be ignored here. Now, the announcements we've heard today have a bit of history, there's a lot of background to that. If you've never heard of Richard Castle's tweet longer, I will link that down below, as well as any other thread that I mention here, so you can read into that. Basically, there were a lot of complaints about how Hi-Risk handles the pro scene, especially outside of Europe, a lot of issues that come with it, payment issues and whatnot. And this complaint wasn't exclusive to just Richard Castle, who I think is a relatively credible source, but also Ionix, which recently left the Smite scene. With Ionix, I would not say that they're necessarily as credible of a source. I've heard, well, a few stories about them. So without accusing anyone here, I wouldn't be surprised if in their case they just kind of hopped on the bandwagon of what was already going on in the Australian scene. So a response from Hi-Risk was needed, especially because we saw some posts lately of how much more money there's to be made in Paladins compared to Smite. And the response so far looks pretty good. I will say that with anything of this sort, you always gotta be critical. It's one thing to hear a promise of something and another thing to actually see that promise come true. So what we know here and what we read here has to be seen with a critical mind. But at the same time, so far it's very good news, it's very promising news, and there's some things that Hi-Risk can't really pull back on that easily without a lot of backlash after this announcement. I will go through the announcement and just point out the most important parts, read out some parts that I think are relevant for that, but kind of break it down a little bit. A very important point is made in the first paragraph already, where Hi-Risk then states that Hi-Risk sees themselves at the relative start of Smite esports as opposed to the middle or the end. This is crucial because it's not exactly the impression that Hi-Risk has given off lately, with Paladins esports being the one that was more invested in, but this seems to be at least intended to be changed and really push Smite esports once again. That in itself, should it come true, is already a very positive announcement for everyone, because obviously if you want to have a healthy esports scene and grow an esports scene, then you will also have to invest into the game as a whole. You have to make sure that the game is good so that people want to play it and people want to watch it, and that in itself should basically affect everyone. The post then goes on to point out various issues that Smite esports currently has, which mostly are known, and how Hi-Risk intends to tackle them. The first one is that new players have a very hard time getting into the scene and get very low visibility. In order to change that, Hi-Risk wants to increase the pricing for the Challengers circuit by at least 500% in Season 5. Obviously, 500% sounds like a ton. As far as I know, while I was not able to find out the exact values of a payment, they were not actually very accessible at all, I remember the current values being dramatically low, so while 500% sounds pretty crazy, it is kinda just more a reasonable amount as far as I remember. I might be wrong here though. In the end, you're probably not gonna be able to make a living off playing in the Challenger circuit, rather just a bonus for playing there, and that was always the intended way for it. However, the more important part here is that all matches of the Challenger circuit are intended to be streamed on Hi-Risk TV using Hi-Risk casters and production. That means there will overall be a much higher quality to those matches, with a lot of restrictions that were there before being gone, and just a lot more potential because you have the studios with the professional equipment and all that, which makes it just a lot better. In the same sense, there's supposed to be an EU and a LAN in between, and players from the Challenger circuit will somehow, in a very difficult fashion, have a way to make it to Worlds as well. If that's going to happen is another question. It's probably kind of like the Gauntlet, where the chances are relatively low, but at least it's there, so there's a reason to compete here. The next big problem is certainty for organizations and sustainability for players. One of the issues that was very much highlighted by Richard Castle in his tweet longer. There's a lack of stability for teams currently because they can basically drop out very easily. And they need a certainty in funding, as in, will the investment into the league pay off? For the players themselves, their goal is to be able to have this as their full-time job. So there's a lot of financial aspects involved here. At the moment, these are not ideal. In order to fix that, hurr wants to decrease the number of teams from 8 to 6, NA and EU each, meaning we have 12 teams in total instead of the current 16. These 4 teams dropping out would probably go down to the challenger circuit, but the big benefit would be there for the other teams. Each team and organization would be funded at a sizable guaranteed level by hurr, assuming certain obligations are met. In return for the hurr funding, each team and org will be required to provide each player with a meaningful minimum salary. More specifically, $30,000 per player per year. This is included in the funding that hurr provides the org with. So even if the org doesn't have money as a startup org, this money will be provided by hurr, so they would be able to pay out those 30,000 to their player and probably not get much for themselves that way, obviously. Lord Whisket pointed out in his tweet linger, which is also linked down below, that this is only for the players though. This does not go for subs or coaches as far as the description goes here. So you may have to consider that in some cases the payment will be split up even further. And 30,000 is already not exactly something that would make you rich, and you might, depending on where you live, have to have another job on the side or some other way of making money. The SPL member teams will be chosen by hurr through an application process. So you have to check first if the orgs are financially stable enough, and certain other factors are checked. This is probably to avoid a situation like there was with Paradigm, where the org just doesn't seem right for Smite and doesn't seem like they will be able to fund themselves and grow. At the same time, orgs that are already in Smite will be supported more, will be kind of favored in this regard, as they already helped grow the Smite scene. If a team goes through this process, they will be guaranteed a spot in the SPL throughout the entire Season 5, which is a bit good and a bit bad, I would say. It generally is good because it helps them invest into Smite. At the same time, it may lead to some issues if a team doesn't want to go with an org anymore, as we had this scenario with Paradigm, so the orgs have to be pre-selected very, very well. Also, as some people care about this a lot, there will be crowdfunding pricing for the SPL again, though not a massive amount. It's modest crowdfunded pricing. For example, the thought that they have at the moment is doing this through hurr TV, where you could subscribe and the subscription money would go to the prize pool. This is something that would, you know, benefit a little bit, as at the moment you can't even subscribe to that channel at all, so it doesn't really make a big difference for hurr themselves. But at the same time, it wouldn't be the same amount as in Season 1. hurr has specifically stated that they'd rather split the prize pool over the whole season, so it's more sustainable for the players, and it's not a gamble on if you win you get everything and if you lose you get nothing, but rather just, you know, spreading it out a little bit with the budget that is there. And I think that's a very understandable decision and will help the growth in long term at least. Problem number 3 is the viewing experience for the NAs and EU scene could be improved. Basically, the issue here is that there was too many games where it's like top tier teams farming bottom tier teams. So that's gonna be fixed mostly through having less teams, but also having more best of 3s. So you will have more high tier teams competing against each other more often. And similarly, problem number 4 tackles non-EU and NA teams, which need more opportunities to play versus EU and NA in order to improve properly, which was a big criticism of Richard Castle as well, playing from OCE. And as such, there will be some more LANs and some improved logistics for especially the organizations handling the situation in other countries. Last but not least, there's something that I proposed in the corresponding Reddit thread. I said that it would make sense to try and host pro players that agree with certain terms for this hosting happening after the SPL games, so the viewers from the SPL games don't go to waste. Instead, give it to the players themselves to help them grow their own brand as well. And the response to that from hurr SNK was rather positive. He said, "This is something that will be talked about for sure. Much of this depends on whether or not we plan on rebroadcasting the games directly after a broadcast for those who may have missed out. I'm not sure how the schedule will work out at this point, but this is something I will personally love to see for our streamers if possible." I do think that rebroadcasting the games right after doesn't make too much sense because you could just click at the VOD and then just click right to the game instead of rewatching it all. I can see why, you know, it would keep in some viewership, but I don't think it's as beneficial as hosting some pros, but it's something that we'll see. But if it happens, it's something that would greatly help Smite on Twitch as well. And this is important because at the moment we're frequently dropping like 10,000 viewers after an SPL stream, or maybe 9,000 and another 1,000 to just go to other channels after. But if those hosts happen, then a lot more people will stay. And that means that Twitch will rate Smite higher, will put it higher in the directory for games, that it still has more viewers, which in return pretty much helps every channel in that directory, every Smite channel, as, you know, it will be high on the viewership, more people click on it and more people go in. So why do I think this all is so important, even if you're not playing in the SPL and you're not interested in watching it? With a good health of the competitive scene, the esports scene, the Twitch viewership will increase. When the Twitch viewership increases, the Twitch reach increases, as I just explained. And that can have massive impact for the success of a game, and if you need an example for that, look at PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. That game was mostly promoted by streamers. Obviously they had some big name streamers coming in for it specifically, and it's a format that works a little bit better on Twitch than Smite ever will, but the theory still applies. As long as you have a high attention on Twitch, the attention will translate over to the game itself as well. You'll have a higher player base, and that in the end will benefit everyone, because higher player base means better matchmaking, means more resources for hires to work with, means a better game. As such, remain critical about this information and check if it's actually set in action like it's announced to, but if it will, we can probably expect growth for Smite in Season 5, especially if the changes in the rest of the departments along with that go in the same direction, go along the same lines of really tackling the issues that have been there, that have been the biggest annoyance for the longest time. Talking about a bigger jungle here, and that kind of stuff. I know that a lot of the pros are a lot more motivated after hearing these changes and generally agree with them. I do very much agree with them and hope that we see the change in this direction actually happening this way. With that, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope this was interesting, I hope this was insightful. If you're not subscribed yet, feel free to click the sub button and maybe the bell. It really helps me out. See you for the next one tomorrow. ZiSotto, out.